Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to Fate's Wide Wheel. I am your host, Sam, and this week we have something very special, a collaboration, and I get to introduce my co-host for the episode.
Yes, it's Matt Dale from the Quantum Leap podcast, and Sam and I have with us Kristy Lowery, the new supervising producer on Quantum Leap and writer of tonight's episode, The Lonely Hearts Club. Kristy, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
We're
really excited to have you.
Yeah, this should be a lot of fun. I really enjoyed the episode. I thought that there were some incredible moments, for the characters, and I really enjoyed the way that the leap paired up with a lot of the character development. And it was done in a very unique way because the leap itself might not have been that action-packed, hyper dramatic leap that we're used to. And I think it was incredibly successful the way that it was, though. And there are lots of questions, I'm sure that Matt and I have. But one of the first things I will throw out there is that this episode has an excellent guest star in Tim Matheson. Tim is just phenomenal. Now, obviously, I know when breaking the episodes and writing the episodes, you don't often know who's going to be cast in the show. So I'm curious, was there any inkling that Tim would be your Neil Russell? And if not, at any point, did you maybe tailor anything towards him, or were things written in a certain way? Because obviously he's someone who has a lot of experience, carries a lot with him. So I was curious as to what the process is when you have a guest cast member like this.
No, we did not know we would be getting Tim. I think early on we knew we wanted to get someone, a name, because it is such, I think, a good character role for anyone to step into. I'm sure I'm allowed to say this, but early on we were kind of like, our prototype was like Ted Danson was like the name we threw. I think even for a while we called the character Ted. I think we tried, I'm sure we went down that road, which is far above my pay grade, but whenever, I think we were slightly into prep, but like I had heard Tim, which I think we were all very excited for, Animal House. Obviously Tim has been doing this for a very long time, great resume. And I will just say, working with him on set, he is just like a lovely human being. And as long as he's been doing this, was just like excited. Like it felt like it was like his first like thing he ever did, which is like just cool for, I think, not only me, but all the actors to like, oh, here's this guy who's been doing this so long and he's still just as like excited to be acting. So Tim ended up being very lovely, such a great actor, such a great human being. So I can't see anyone else playing that Neil role now. So I'm glad that's who we got.
Tim really lights up the screen with a lot of what in some people's hands could be almost cheesy OTT rom-com dialogue. It's very big, broad strokes.
Yeah.
I'm really interested, going back a step before the casting, what kind of inspiration you had. Was this always designed to be for me, going into the Christmas season as we are, this feels like the season for rom-coms. And was this the kind of what you were going up against, trying to fit into the Hallmark movie style?
Yeah, I think early on, and I admittedly have not seen this movie, but I know Dean threw around my favorite year, or when we were just talking about conceptually, and even like, and this is not necessarily tonally like get him to the Greek, but like you have to, like your character has to get someone who is, of prominence to like, who's obviously not listening to you, to like get them to a place, was kind of like early on where it started. And then I think just naturally, yeah, because we even called it a rom-com. I think at very times when we were shooting it, everyone felt that very much, which, yeah, I guess looking back at other episodes, we don't comedy, of course, but usually it's like action and this and that. And this is kind of felt, I think we even leaned into those moments sometimes, and even those tropes of like rom-com moments. So I think pretty early on, we knew like it was going to be a little bit lighter tone and lean into just like the romance of getting the woman you love back, and the comedy of that. And then of course the fact that this character was used to be a sitcom actor, was in the comedy world, like it felt like you had to like lean into like that charm and just like being funny and that kind of thing. So I think we talked around that. We kind of knew we were swimming in those waters pretty early on.
Yeah, it's, and one of the things that I think works so well is that there's a wonderful balance, and I find this quite often, frankly, with the Quantum Leap revival and in the classic series as well. Is there's such a wonderful balance between the dramatic moments and these incredibly grounded, or excuse me, these incredibly you've got the balance between the grounded moments and some of these incredibly over the top moments, or what could be over the top, and it works so well. And I'm curious, when you're approaching an episode, from a writer's perspective, how do you do that? How do you kind of balance the honesty with some of that sort of a little bit more oddball comedy as well?
Obviously we do things like, tonal passes. And as far as like, the writers, I think, and I'm coming in new to the show, but everyone has been there since season one. Like we kind of know what is, like this is either a bridge too far in either like in any genre we do, like, oh, we're not this scary, or we're not this, like we don't kill people. So we all kind of know like what that line is. And I think for this specific episode, what's great about is like we have like the character arc, and specifically, Ben's character, but also in this Neil, who Tim's playing, just a where their arc starts out. So it kind of starts out, if you notice, the episode is very light, like you are in a rom-com, but as you get further into the episode, it starts to get heavier and more emotional. And by the end, there are tears, and there are like moments where you're like, I'm sure we'll get into that, like, breakups, and this can happen. So it kind of helped, that kind of helped guided us, like where is Ben at emotionally in the episode, and also where is Neil at in terms of like the wedding and all that. So I think that kind of gave us a guiding light to follow. Like we started out light and then definitely got into like heavier, almost drama territory by the end, which was very helpful to just keep us in the right direction.
I'd like to understand, because I know a lot of our listeners like to understand the process of what happens behind the scenes. You mentioned a tonal pass. Was that what does that really mean in terms of what does that look like?
Yeah, I won't say we always do them with every episode, but I think sometimes when we're breaking in the room, even when we pitch ideas, sometimes someone will pitch something that's a great idea, but we always have to question again. Is that our show? Is that for our audience? Is that something we can even do on NBC? Because we can say we want to do, a scary episode or something that is like thrilling and action, but we're not going to go into like rated R territory, or we're not going, again, headshots and cussing and like hard R stuff. So you just know, like you can pitch something that is like of that, and then you have to be realistic about what your show does best, who your actors are, what you're even allowed to do, and then just kind of pull back or amp it up, up to the edge of the line of what you're allowed to do. So when I say tonal passage, again, if someone pitches like, and then someone comes in with the gun and kills everybody, I'd be like, okay, now what's the quantum leap version of that? What does Ben do that's smart, and he can do a clever thing, because that's our show. So I guess when I say tonal passage, I mean, everyone is pretty good about checking our pitches up front. And then when it lays out on the page, like, okay, that feels arch for the villain to do, or this is a little too rom-com-y for this moment, or it gets a little silly and broad. I think we just are always kind of keeping that mindful for like what its strengths are.
I love hearing about that, and it's fascinating to me the way that the room in particular interacts and collaborates on the episodes. One of the things that's interesting, and Matt and I were talking about this beforehand because we're both intrigued by this, is that even though we're aware that most of this takes place, most of the writers' room is virtual over Zoom, that a lot of the writers, in fact, I think all of them with one exception, are in the LA area, and that exception is you're in Arkansas. So we're curious, how does that work?
Well, I will say I lived in LA for 10 years. I'm originally from Arkansas, but I did live in LA for the previous 10 years, writing and being in person in a room. And then, the pandemic has kind of changed, obviously not only our industry, but, the world in some sense. And so, that allowed me, I moved back home a year ago. So I will say, and I'm maybe down the road, you guys will get to talk to her. We do have another writer who is long distance and even longer distance than she's in Europe. She's from the LA area, but currently is in Europe. So I guess luckily I'm not the only one, but yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I've done virtual rooms. Again, we've all been in LA and in a virtual room because of the pandemic. So for me, it's like there's a time difference, but I feel like I was like, we might as well all be in LA, I guess, kind of thing. So there's really, I guess, no difference for me. But what is great about what I like about the virtual room, obviously, is it allows you to get writers who are not necessarily based in LA, because people, New York, Europe, everywhere. It kind of just opens up, especially a show like Quantum Leap, where you're doing different time periods, different areas. Like to be able to get a writer from, the South, the East Coast, another country, like I think that opens you up to just diversity in your room that is different than what you typically think of when you think of diversity.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. And your experience too, speaking of your past, like this isn't your first time travel show either, because you worked on 12 Monkeys.
You've done your research. Yes, I did. 12 Monkeys was my very first, I was a staff writer. It was my very first show. I did season 3 and 4 there. Have you guys watched 12 Monkeys? I'm curious.
A little bit. I honestly, I watched a little bit of the first season, but I've not seen the rest.
And this is not a 12 Monkeys show, but I highly recommend anyone who is into time travel, because to me, what's different about 12 Monkeys is serialized time travel. So if you like to wind yourself in literal knots and circles and time loops, it gets pretty crazy what we are doing there. But yeah, this is, I was kind of excited to return to time travel, because it just allows you to do, like, who doesn't love to jump to a different time period and do a different thing. So I was very excited to return to that sandbox, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
So that really interests me then. So you like the opportunity to jump to different time periods. So for you, was the first thought rom-com, or was the first thought turn of the century, turn of the millennium LA? What was the driver behind this episode?
I think I'm trying to think back to early conversations. Again, the first thing that pops out in my mind is Dean saying my favorite year. So again, if I don't know where that was coming from. I feel like we were thinking, we knew that we wanted to do, in terms of Ben and Madison, like their relationship story, something big here. And so I don't know that we were thinking rom-com, but I feel like the rom-com, like the year wasn't a huge thing. Like I think we went 2000 just because thinking about like, just like there's big stars now, but you had like, that felt like a time where you had like giant, mega, like iconic stars. So I just feel like 2000, we could do something somewhat recent, but also still 20 years ago. But it was like of a time of era when we were looking at pictures of like Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt and like just the things they would wear. It just felt very like, you could look at that time period and go, oh, that was late 90s, early 2000s. Like it's pretty, identifiable. So I feel like we were rom-com or in that tone first. And then, I think we just picked the year 2000, just like it felt like a good even number. So, but I don't think we were ever thinking like an 80s, 90s, or even, more modern version that I can recall.
Yeah, sorry, I notice I keep saying rom-com and you keep seeming to try and divert away from that. So I guess you don't feel this is as rom-comish as I mean it as a compliment. I love a good rom-com.
No. I think part of that is if you would have told me 6 months long enough, well, we've had the strike. If you had told me a year ago I'd be writing any kind of rom-com episode, I probably would have laughed in your face. So when I think about, did I write a rom-com? Did I? I don't know. I'm like, oh, I guess I did. So for me, it's just more like typically not my first go-to in terms of what I do, but like I had a blast writing it. So yeah, I mean, it is a rom-com, right? I guess that's probably just my own bias of like, the term maybe. So
it has all the classic beats and this sort of big plot of this guy making a grand romantic gesture, and then towards the end there's tears. So yeah, sure. to me that's a rom-com.
That's fair.
The lovely thing though is that like it definitely does not play too much into the convention, because if it did, like Neil would get the girl, and and Ben and Madison would, and instead, like, it does the exact opposite. And it's lovely, with the end with Neil going to his daughter. But before we get there, one of the things that I was thinking about is, like, just for a little further context for listeners, if they're not familiar, my favorite year was a movie from the 80s with Peter O'Toole, where he played this sort of aging, swashbuckling film star from the 30s and 40s. And this comedy writer gets to basically spend a week with him in order to try to get him to this comedy cavalcade of stars TV show that they're doing. And so I can see the parallels there, and with Ben's journey with Neil. But one of the things that I really enjoy too about the nature of the story and just the nature of the time travel aspect is that there's these wonderful nods to the period, including I love right off the bat, after we kind of get the fake out with the leap in, where we think we're in some sort of crazy heist is about to happen, is we get this nice little nod to Quentin Tarantino, where Neil makes the line about Quentin, and at that particular point in time, as you said, like, that was one of the things that Quentin Tarantino was kind of known for, was bringing some of these actors back, like a John Travolta or Robert Forster, and I think that it really plays well into that as aspect of the time period. Was there anything else about the time period that you felt was really interesting to explore? Because you don't necessarily get to do a lot of that over the course of the episode, but there are these little conventions, like even like the Tonight Show, for instance, that I feel like at that time, were so much more integral to the time period than they are, say, today, or even maybe 20, 30 years prior.
I don't know if there's anything necessarily in terms of like what is it about 2000. I think, again, now everything's so like digital, and you can watch like TV and movies on, your phone, your computer, there's influencers, all that. But like, that was of a time where, like, again, the big names of, Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise, because we even talked about, it's like, imagine being with Tom Cruise the day before he died. Like, that's kind of sometimes how we would like imagine the magnitude of like something like that. So I think part of it is just like of a time in which like stars were so big, Hollywood had this kind of like beam about it in a way. Probably now people, I think, look at Hollywood sometimes and they're like, Hollywood. But like then it was like, a shining beacon of like hope and this and that, and just trying to remember that time. And of course, like, we had fun little, like, even picking out wardrobe, like the Planet Hollywood hat. I was like, is Planet Hollywood even still a thing? And small things like that. And you're like, oh, even 20 years, things have like disappeared and went away. So, I will say this is, I think, still to date, the new like episode doing 2000 is, I guess, the most modern thing we've done this season. So there isn't, I guess, visually some of the most like, you're in the 80s, 70s, 50s, 40s. It doesn't quite have that, but I think, it is of a time where we like, I'm imagining most of our viewers, like, you remember the year 2000, you remember what it was like, you've been there, you're like, oh yeah, I've seen that wardrobe. So I feel like it's weirdly nostalgic because you lived through that. And like in the 40s, like, I wasn't around. It's cool to see that stuff, but like I couldn't tell you what that felt like, but you can tell someone like what the 2000s felt like, which I think is kind of cool. And I will say what kind of helped us in thinking of like the big stars. I think what's a little bit different about this episode, usually Ben is kind of like, when he has his host and he has, the person he's trying to help, he's usually leading that in an active way. And it's like, well, who's the type of person that he would like kind of get off on a wayward path and like listen to every word and follow? It's like, it's a big movie star. It's like, again, imagine being with Tom Cruise. Well, if Tom Cruise says he wants to go break up a wedding, you're like, yeah, Tom Cruise, I'm totally going to follow you, as opposed to like Ben's supposed to be like, no, we need to go do this other mission. I need to help you. So I think having that kind of like time of when you would be starstruck really helped us buy into the narrative that like Ben would go kind of off mission and do this thing because of who Neil Russell is and his love for him, which I think really helps sell that kind of that era and that story for us.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things, of course, about the episode that we mentioned earlier that I think plays so well are the sort of the parallel love stories that we have going on. And I honestly, I hesitate to even call them love stories because I think there's a different name for them, but I don't know exactly what to call them. And not only, of course, do you have Neil's and of course Ben and Madison, but we also get a wonderful scene between Ian and Rachel. We haven't seen Rachel for a while since the first season. What was it like to bring her back, and what was it like to explore, not only, of course, the relationship as it's advanced between Ian and Rachel and kind of been rekindled in the past 3 years, the missing 3 years, but also to bring in these larger sort of plot arc elements with the microchip and what could be going on with that. There's a lot. I mean, there's a lot that going on in this episode. It's filled with a lot. So I'm curious as to like playing with that element and introducing that bit as well as bringing Rachel back. Yeah. What was that like?
Yeah, I would say there's a pretty big, or at least launching pad for a B story here that as you go on for season 2, you'll see this is the kind of the beginning. But the interesting thing I remember when we talked about bringing Rachel back was I don't believe we had seen her character since like 113, I want to say. So there was this kind of like, and I think that was kind of left like you don't know if her and Ian are still together or what that was. So it's like, if we want to bring her back and say they're still dating, like how do you kind of fill in the gap of what's happened between those 10 plus episodes? And then, plot terms like what is the role she can fill and is going to fill going forward. So, but I also think it's nice to see, a relationship that, because the Addison Ben thing is such like it's literally like hologram, like they were in a relationship, but like literally can't touch, to see two people be in a relationship who are actually both physically there and like go home to each other every night and have a history and all that, just like weirdly feels like the most normal relationship in a sense. One of them is not a hologram. Now, of course, Addison and Tom, which we didn't have last season, so there is that now. But I think it was nice bringing her back. And like I said, not to get anything going forward, but we will be seeing more of them and kind of how that relationship is strained by, this ongoing chip issue that is being had. But I would say definitely like keep an eye on that story because it becomes important down the road.
Nice. Cool. Looking forward to that.
Thanks for the tease. I'm interested. Sam kind of touched on it, but I just want to delve a little bit further. So you've got, for want of a better word, love stories. You've got Neil and Ben both in stories where they've made decisions about their relationship, and that's very clear. And then you've also sort of got that with the Ian and Rachel plot as well, where he's made that decision to keep a secret from her. So you've got 3 different storylines, 2 of which very much front and center, and then the Ian and Rachel one. This sort of a what came first piece. If we weren't ready for the chip piece to come out, do you think that scene would have played out differently in a different episode? The fact that it was the right time to bring the chip scene out, was that what caused that to be kind of a third strand of that emotional plot line?
Honestly, until you asked me the question before, I didn't even, and this may sound silly of me as a writer, like, because I was just thinking like the Lonely Hearts Club, I always just thought of it as like Ben and Neil, but obviously Ian is probably a part of that club looking back. And so I think we were kind of chip story was kind of, we knew we needed to kind of get that going. Again, I can't remember exactly at what point Rachel came in, but I don't know that we were looking at that story as like, oh, we also have this other relationship that is kind of playing out. Tragically is not the word, but like, a romantic relationship, but doesn't kind of like end in a happy way that you think of in the beginning. So I'm glad you guys kind of observed that, because I didn't even I didn't consider it's actually 3 love stories there in some sense. I guess I look at that as more of like this kind of launching off point for the chip, but you're absolutely right. It is a, especially for Ian, their own love story, or reintroducing love story, and how is that going to be ongoing through the thing. So I admittedly maybe didn't see the connection until you just said that. So.
We fans are often known for seeing things that weren't intended to be there. And I'm just always interested to know if something was intentional or if it just happened that way and we notice and appreciate it anyway. regardless
Absolutely.
of the background. So it's cool.
No, it's a great observation. Like I said, now I think the Lonely Hearts Club has suddenly gotten bigger, which is makes it even kind of more sad, happy. It's like I said, it's a happy episode, but there at the end, you're like, oh, if you look at those three relationships, you're like, oh man, oof, poor. That poor club.
Right.
They all came out pretty
all trying to do
scathed.
the right thing.
Yeah,
all trying to do the right thing, all being somewhat toxic with it.
Yeah. Something else is, speaking of like the parallel storylines within the episode, I have, since I've seen episode 4, and, we got episodes 1, 2, and 3 as screeners, and then we got 4 and 5. So there was a bit of separation between when we saw 3 and when we saw 4. That said, immediately I could not help but see 4 as sort of this emotional sequel almost to episode 3, because I gave Raymond Lee his well-deserved laurels on the last episode of Fate's Wide Wheel, because I just think his performance in that episode, and in particular some of the moments that he has with Addison, are just brilliant pieces of acting. Well, in this episode, not only do we get more brilliance obviously from Ray, but Caitlin has a couple of moments in particular that are just astounding. And specifically the moment where she says she almost jumped into the accelerator to go after him when they were shutting the project down. I mean, that scene is very powerful, and she obviously rises to the occasion. When you're working on something like that, especially knowing what came before in episode 3, what type of thought and care goes into crafting a scene like that in order to to kind of pay some of that stuff off while also moving these characters forward?
I mean, when I got this episode, and again, we kind of knew it was going to be the episode in which Ben and Addison, break up, for lack of a better term, even though they're technically already broken up by the happenstance of, 3 years and Tom and all that. I feel like the character arcs and those kind of things, sometimes we map those out. Those are less movable than, again, are we going to do a 50s action thing? Are we going to be in the 80s? Those kind of, we obviously we talk about inside, but sometimes it's like, well, what can pair along with those? Like, what's the best time period and host and story and environment to like accentuate the character arcs and stuff? And I think this one was a big one because, I have this actually funny story. I remember I was on the bus. I don't know what day we were shooting, but I was on there with Ray and Caitlin, and she just looked over at me and she's like, so you're just the new kid coming in here and breaking up the fan favorite relationship. And I was like, oh my God, that is exactly what I did. But I was like, and that kind of hit me of like this again, say what you want about the episode in terms of like the whole, but like, I think you will look back at this one in terms of like, their relationship, this is where it clearly like ended to an extent, and like how devastated I think some fans will be or maybe not, but like it was a lot of heavy stuff. And it was also a way for like, Ray, Ben's character, it's been, he's had 3 leaps. This is his 4th leap. It's been a very short time for him. And how is he processing that? We saw some of that in 3 and how he, was a little more reckless. And then for Caitlin, who's had 3 years, and it's like, those scenes we knew where they just both laid everything out on the table, like, hey, here's my side and here's what I'm going through and here's my side, and neither one of them are wrong, but neither one of them like are right, and it doesn't fix the situation they're in, but it is what it is. I think it was just nice for those characters to be able to lay out those cards and say, here's where we're at, what do we do from here? And then of course, Ben makes his choice at the end about what he thinks needs to happen. So I think we take those scenes very seriously because, again, the other stuff's interchangeable. We could have put that in a thriller. We could have set that in the 80s, but that character stuff, you can't really move forward with your story arcs until you have those moments. So I think you have to take care of the characters. And here's what's great with working with the actors. They know, they know the characters. They've spent more time with their characters than you have. As writers, we have to take care of everyone. We have, anywhere from, 6 to 10 characters on any given episode to juggle. They sometimes only think about their, what would Ben be going through? What would Addison be going through? So sometimes you just talk with them and they're like, well, the last episode I was going through this. And so sometimes they can help recenter you on like, oh yeah, because we're talking about episodes ahead of time. You're writing 4, but you're talking about 5 and 6, and so they can help recenter you. Like, this is where I think my character's head's at, and so it's really great to just check in with them of like, hey, given where you were last episode, like, where do you think you are? And sometimes you can make changes based on that, or they accentuate certain dialogue you've given them because they're like, well, I thought my character would say it this way because, they just have so many interesting takes, I guess, on it. I enjoyed checking in with them during those scenes just to like make sure like where their head's at and like if they thought that their character, because it's surprising like how much just tonally you change the way you say a word or you add a word, and like sometimes in those big scenes, like as you fans will read into it and it'll take on a whole new meaning. So it's sometimes they'll add stuff and you're like, wow, that was a really good ad. And so I think, and this is just my opinion about the episode, when I go back and watch those really big scenes, like I still get teary-eyed, and I was like, I know what they're going to say and I know like where it's going, and I'm just like, the acting I thought in those scenes was fantastic. So
yeah, it's great writing and great performances. The two together, and the direction. I mean, just everything about, particularly that scene where Addison and Ben are talking. I find it really fascinating that your story about Caitlin and what she said, because what I've seen online over the last few weeks is fandom seems to accept that they're over. There's some theories that, okay, maybe they'll get back together, but basically fandom accepts that they're over. What seems to have divided fandom is half of us think, well, Ben is in the right. She should have waited forever. And the other half understand why she didn't. And I love the fact that this gives, after Ben's little rant in episode 3, you can probably see which side I'm on. After Ben's little rant in episode 3, Addison gets a good chance to really articulate her side. This isn't even a question. This is just an observation, and to see what's going to happen tomorrow after this goes out, what people are talking about online, because I do wonder if more people are going to say, I get Addison's point of view now.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's going to happen, but...
Yeah, I admittedly stay out of the, while I'm on Twitter and all that, I stay out of the circles because I've seen, things happen on other shows with Twitter and writers. And so I wasn't quite aware of that. But I will say, in writing that scene in which you have to be in both of their heads, like just imagining me in either one of those situations, neither one of them are great. I don't know that, like, flip a coin on any given day and like, do you want to be Addison? And this is something when I talked to Caitlin, I think we added in the dialogue because, from her point of view, when we wrote the dialogue, which is mostly there, I know we added because she was thinking about like, she's like, well, Ben left me in this life. Like, we had a perfect life and he thought he needed to go jump into the accelerator to save me, but like, he left me here. And I was like, oh, like, we didn't necessarily write it that way originally, but like she added that, and I was like, that would be hard when you think about like, again, and if you're in a relationship, like pointing at you, like you started this, you left me here, like, do you want to be, and again, and Ben's point of view, like he's left in terms of like just leaping and leaping. So like they all have their own, obviously arguments about like who is in the worst situation hurt the most, but I thought that was a unique perspective that she was able to provide for us from an actress's point of view of like, I was left here. I was left in this life, and it's not as great as, everyone thinks it might be. So I hope when people watch that scene, they are, whether they're not empathetic towards Addison's character, but like can actually look at that and be like, oh, I wonder, would I rather be Ben or would I rather be Addison? Because I don't know that there's a clear answer. And I think hopefully that's how we intended it, is that you feel for both of them. And like the heartbreak of that is, I think, where the emotion comes from, hopefully. Because if there was a clear black and white, like you did this and you're wrong, it's like, okay, it's easy to side with that,
Yeah, I think the pure like pathos of the moment that is evoked not only for Addison but also for Ben. I think that's the key, is that you really, over the course of 2 episodes in particular, you really do see both sides. And with this episode specifically, I think by the end, you can't help but kind of come to terms with it in some ways, as a viewer. For me, like I never was on either side, because I understood where Ben was coming from. I understood, where Addison was coming from. So for me, it's just been really gratifying to see the journey that they've gone on up to this point. And it's going to be fascinating to see where it goes from here. One of the other things about this episode that stands out, I think, especially from the prior three, is that we get to spend more time with Tom in this episode than any previous episode. What was it like to write for that character? Because I personally, if I'm being completely honest, I think it's probably the most difficult character to write for on the show right now. I genuinely believe that. I think that there's just that character to me has got to be difficult because you don't want to do too much of this. You don't want to do too much of that. So I'm very curious what it's like to write for him. And then I have a follow up to that, but well, let's go with that first.
Yeah. And, I believe he's introduced in 2. So, this episode was kind of picking up, an introduction of what we saw in 2. We talked about Tom and what's interesting again, before they get cast, we all have this kind of idea of who they are. We didn't necessarily have a prototype, but, we kind of thought of him as like, here's what I think the tricky part is like anytime, we've seen these storylines where you introduce like the other man, the other person, the third wheel, like what love triangle, whatever, I think fans will have their own preconceived notions of like, are they going to be evil or are they actually the one? And like, so just trying to tiptoe those lines, like we just want to make this like a character who is, obviously there to do his job as good as what he does, cares for Addison. There was actually a scene that was cut out of my episode in which you actually saw they were like walking down the hall talking with like Jen and Magic and Ian, but like you got the sense that like they've known Tom for a while and he is their friend, which I don't know if you necessarily missed in the episode, but like the idea was like while he's new to people at Quantum Leap, he's not like new to the group necessarily, and like everyone loves him, and he doesn't put off a threatening error and is like has helped Quantum Leap get back on its feet, is like there to do a job. I think we're just always trying to like make sure we are not like pointing an arrow or like leaning towards like any of the like preconceived notions of like, is he good? Is he bad? Is he this? Is he that? We're just trying to play as like he's a human who fits into the story and this is his purpose. And then of course, when you cast someone, they bring their own kind of mannerisms and stuff to it, which sure people can read into, but sometimes you get an actor and you're not necessarily like riding towards like those things. So you're like, I remember one time on set, like Peter was crossing his arms and I was like, does that make him look like he's being closed off and defensive? And I was like, and that wasn't written. It was just like, that is the actor's sometimes inclination to like cross their arms or make a certain face and do all that. So I think or at least when I was on set, I was always trying to be mindful of like, what someone could read into, and it not necessarily like we're not like throwing in a look there like, oh, again, is he gonna turn out to be this just because he made that one look? So I was trying to be conscious of that. But yeah, Tom, as far as a character to write for, I think what helped me is like he believes that Quantum Leap is this great program, which it is, and I won't say that was his number one because obviously Addison is there, but like just keep him on the road. Like he is there to help. He is everyone's friend and he is a nice guy. And that is truly who he is. And then however he's perceived from there, like we really can't control. But sure. not necessarily the easiest character to write for because you are like on a tightrope in a way that the other characters you can kind of like allow them to be like a little more free because they aren't carrying those weight of expectations as like a new character who's come to the show, I guess.
Yeah, it's funny to me because you mentioned the love triangle thing, and obviously that has certainly been thrown around in the fandom. But for me, I don't see it as a love triangle at all. I just see it as someone's moved on and someone has not, and there's a good reason why he hasn't. And but the other thing, the follow up that I wanted to ask about Tom specifically is that something happens towards the end of the episode, which I feel is pretty revelatory, and not just in terms of the revival, but the classic series as well. And Tom gives this theory about the nature of Quantum Leap being sacrifice, that Sam, made a sacrifice by going into the accelerator, that Ben made a sacrifice by going into the accelerator, and that it's a one-way ticket. where did that come from? And obviously I know you can't give anything away, so I'm not going to ask where that leads, but I'm just so fascinated by the idea. I think it's lovely. I think it's heartbreaking. It certainly plays into the finale of the classic series and Sam never returning home. So I'd love to know a little bit about where that came from. And was that one of those moments that sort of collaborated on, that like Martin and Dean kind of give guidance there? Was that all you? Was that, I'm just very curious about that particular aspect of the episode.
And can I throw in just a little extra to that? Just
Sure.
to maybe you can also include this in your answer. It also very specifically, that's quite a pivot from what we've seen so far in the new series. The classic series was very much about God or fate or time is leaping him. The new series has been technology. It's a machine that's leaping him. And suddenly we get this very spiritual, philosophical scene. So I'm also just interested in the fact that why now? Why this pivot?
Hopefully you're not disappointing with my answer. This would be a great time for Dean to be on here and answer, because I'll admit that is a scene that was not in the original break that we talked about. It is something that Dean added probably right around the first draft. And like I said, I don't know that we had any conversations in the room about anything. What I remember originally what that scene was supposed to be was just supposed to be a Tom and Magic, like, hey, we are two guys high up in this program who are carrying this bird of like time travel and saving the world. And like, what is that like when you're talking to like basically a peer in a way that like, not that everyone else is not on their level, but again, they're carrying this kind of like mission on their shoulders, and like what would they talk about? Again, I can't speak to the sacrifice in this where that came from Dean specifically. I've actually never asked him, but I think it does speak to Tom's character in terms of like, again, how much he respects the program, how much he's thought about it. He mentions his dead wife, and like you wonder like how much has he thought about time travel and what has happened to Sam, what has happened to Ben, and what kind of meaning this program has moving forward. So I wish I had like an answer that was like, this is exactly why I wrote that, but I don't know if you'll catch Dean on another one and you can come back. But I think that will have to come from him, because I honestly don't have an insight, and I have admittedly never asked. So but I think I'm going to ask him now.
This is a time travel show. Is the dead wife going to have any relevance? You can't answer that, I know. So sorry, I couldn't help myself.
Feel like here's what I always feel about shows. You always have the liberty to plant seeds, and whether you decide to water them or not is always a great thing you have in your back pocket, because it's like sometimes you'll just write something and then you never pick it up again. But sometimes we'll come in on episodes. It's like, well, remember we mentioned that thing randomly in episode 2. And it's like, I wonder if we can water that seed and it grows into something. So you'll have to see if it's rained any on that one.
That was a very good answer.
That was a great answer. Was there anything else left? Because you mentioned earlier a cut scene. Was there anything else left kind of either on the cutting room floor or just not filmed at all that you were really like, oh, this is going to be great, and then it didn't
oh my
make
gosh. This was honestly the most fun on set I've ever had doing this scene, and it rained that day and it was cold, so that tells you it had to be extra fun. So and I think I'm allowed to talk about this, but in the original script there was a scene, so when Neil and Ben went to go steal his tuxedo, as currently edited, the police come and they're arrested, and that's how it ends. Originally they take the tuxedo, and on their way out they're in Universal City Walk, but there was a bunch of impersonators out there. I don't know that you can see them clearly in shot, but we had so many, I can't even remember. Like there was a Doc Brown one, there was a Marilyn Monroe one, like we had tons of them out there. But Neil he's taking photos with Fan, and someone just comes up and slaps the camera out of Ben's hand, and you look over and it is a Arnold Schwarzenegger impersonator who only talks in Arnold Schwarzenegger quotes. which is like things like, you know, he'll look at Neil and be like, you know, who's your daddy and what does he do? And the guy was and him, Arnold Schwarzenegger and Neil get into a literal fist fight.
Oh my gosh.
And that is actually how they ended up arrested. Now, we had to cut that for time because, you know, we get 42 minutes and some odd seconds. But
sure.
And that was there from originally we were talking about like whatever actor we cast, like at the time it was Ted Danson. It's like, what if you run into an impersonator of yourself and they think you're better than you? But it's like, how do you realistically how can we realistically shoot that? So we were somewhere between, I think, Arnold Schwarzenegger and Rocky, and we literally put out a casting call, and there is only apparently one guy who does Arnold impersonations basically in the whole country. So we flew this guy out from Florida.
Wow.
And he was lovely. He was so good. I mean, he was like 6'5", 6'6", like had to be like pushing through him. Like he was like probably bigger than Arnold. I don't know. In a leather jacket, glasses. It was so great. We had so much like when the crew is like dying laughing when he's like doing these quotes and like getting in fights. So that is one. And again, you could cut it out. Obviously, it did not plot wise change the story necessarily, but I wish we would have had an extra couple minutes that we could have got that in there. Cause I think just for like Hollywood fun, like a memorable scene. That my money would have been on that one. Cause I still think about like I said, I have access to those cuts. So I can always go back, but I really wish the audience could have seen that and that's that tonal thing of like, is this absurd? And it's like, maybe a little bit, but like to watch again, even on the day, like Tim Matheson arguing with this guy who looks just like Arnold, and then Ray's in the corner, like trying to like get them to stop fighting just in real life. I was like, this is absurd, but it's so great. I was trying to think if there was anything else major we cut out. You know, there were some scenes that were obviously longer than what you see. You're not missing anything necessarily, but I know that scene with Addison and Ian after she just has the big fight with Ben and they go in Magic's office. That scene was actually much longer. Just had to cut for time. So, you know, if we were on streaming and we could have, you know, 55 minutes per episode, we could see all these things. But, you know, we were pretty beholden to that 42 minutes and change.
Yeah, I can only hope that one day, you know, Peacock will do the thing they've done with The Office and, you know, put those extended episodes on or something like that. Gosh. That would be awesome. You know, here's a quick question, actually, to kind of go off of that. Now, obviously, with the Arnold scene, it's a little different because you change the circumstances of you know, their arrest. But, you know, do you all ever look at some of these scripted moments that might not make it to the screen as still being considered kind of like a part of the story, just maybe unseen, and so that you can use that to inform something that you might write down the road? Or are you basically of the mind that if it didn't make the screen, it's not, you know, it's not really a part of the story, and if we pivot away from something that we might have written, you know, 3 or 4 episodes back that didn't make it to the screen, that's okay?
I don't know that we ever, and again, other writers who have been on the show longer may have different experiences. For the episodes I've been there for, I can't think of any that we've cut something, at least to my knowledge, that we would want to retread. But I know sometimes when something gets cut, we try to think about like, why was that cut, and maybe we don't do that again. Or there was something about it that if it wasn't for time, like was it a tonal thing? You know, sometimes like point of views, like if you have a character like lurking around the corner following Ben and those get cuts, it's like, well, is that a network studio thing? Is that we don't want to show that? So I don't think we ever go back to them thinking we can like, not unless it was planted somewhere else and we just didn't get to see the actual scene. But I can't think of any, but we do take those lessons of what's cut and try to, again, question, why was it cut? Should we not do that again? Yeah, just a lot. There's the weird thing about like, I guess making a TV show, there's a lot of different like, you know, hands in the mix kind of thing. You have a lot of people to answer to and a lot of people who, you know, believe this is what the show is, or this is what we should have, and notes and stuff and that. And so you're always kind of like trying to, you know, appease people some. So sometimes stuff just gets like cut for like, again, sometimes it's time, sometimes it's a studio network thing, sometimes it's we don't need that. So you're always kind of just like staying on your toes, ready to like move any direction and make it work. But
Well, all right. I do have one other thing that I wanted to ask about, just kind of what's coming up without any spoilers, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But can you talk about some of the things that you might be looking forward to the most, or if there's any, episodes that you've had the chance to work on or see already that we haven't, obviously, that you're really excited for, for the fans to witness?
I don't think this is a spoiler, but the Hannah character, I think, well, I don't want to speak for all the writers, but I feel like we're very excited about that character's role in the season. And not only that, I was a huge Liza Taylor. Playing that was really just cool that we got her. So I'm just excited to see, or for everyone to see kind of like, again, not only the purpose, but just the acting from Eliza. I think she's great. And I can't say what the episode's probably about, but there are some time periods we go back to that I don't know that people thought we would have went back that far.
Sure.
Say that. And places and the particular place we will go that I don't know that was in people's, when you just think of Quantum Leap, I don't know if that would be on your list of 15 places we would go probably. So I think we were doing some really cool stuff, not only this season, but coming up in this first 8, which I know will air, I think, pretty subsequently. But I think we're all just very excited about what we've been able to do this season and make the show, I always think it just looks great. We always do the best with our budget and cast and all those things. So I think we're all really proud of how it's turned out. So I think we're just excited for what the fans think of this new season in general. But yeah, I think those are two things that I'm we'll be watching Twitter during a couple of those episodes just to see what people think right out of the gate of oh, we're there and we're in this time. Whoa, it's cool. So
I think for the first 8, thanks to the trailer that aired at the end of episode 1, I think we know the time periods and locations for all of them.
Fair.
So I've got a suspicion I know the two things you're alluding to there.
I forgot the trailer does, and we have had conversations about the trailers and how much they technically spoil, but we get it. You gotta tease a little bit.
I heard a little bit of that myself. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I love Hannah, and I cannot wait to see what's next. I think Eliza is superb, and that was definitely, I think episode 3. I really enjoyed her in the episode and what she brought to that, especially considering where Ben was, on his journey.
So just to clarify, then, obviously. The first 8 episodes produced. We've had the strikes over the summer. Am I right in thinking that the team are currently breaking the next 5 episodes? And is that the current plan? I know obviously we've got the SAG strike going on, but are you looking further ahead than the next 5, or is this very much a block in your mind at the moment of a continuing story up to 13?
I think right now we're writing for what we know, and that is that we have 5 more episodes. I don't know for a lot. I feel like I listened to Sam, one of your previous episodes, and there was mention of other episodes. That's always I feel like in any show, there's always a conversation of whether they'll give you more. We don't know that. But it's always this cloud looming over. But what we do know is we have 5 more episodes to round out the 13, and that is our focus. So I think I can say we're currently breaking 11. What's weird is we have broke most of them previously, but with the strike, we've went back and changed a couple. So we've had to kind of do some re-breaking. But we were supposed to resume shooting next month, but with the SAG strike, obviously, if you don't have actors, you are shooting nothing. Yeah. We've made jokes about the writers being actors, which none of us, background, I can't speak for the other writers. I could only be background and a dead body with a sheet over them is about as good as I am. But until that is resolved, we technically won't be shooting everything, but we're going to try to obviously get our stories together. So in the event that the strike is lifted, we will be able to roll into shooting those next 5. But I think, I was trying to think if there's anything else I can say for them. it's weird. They're obviously of the piece of the 13, but they're also different because we've had I think it's very rare that you get to write and shoot the first 8 and watch them and then kind of look at the last 5, because usually you're just doing it all of a piece, and it's kind of like you don't get feedback until you're already done shooting all of them. By the time you've heard anything, it's like, well, too late, we can't go back and do anything. But we kind of had this lull that we've been able to get feedback from the powers that be, and also now fans are starting to watch the first couple episodes, and we're still writing. So I think that kind of is in the back of my mind, how we round out this last few episodes. So I think that's a unique case that you don't typically get unless there's a strike. So
unfortunately, you got to make the good out of the bad sometimes. So,
Sure. Yeah.
But I really loved Lonely Hearts Club. I just think the kind of the 1-2 punch really of 3 and 4 is fantastic, and speaks well to the way that the season is going thus far, just because there's so many high points already. And I love the fact that we're getting these wonderful emotional stories about our characters. And even when you look at the stuff that's happening at the project, we're seeing more, wonderful character moments between human beings, as opposed to a lot of, exposition, which I know is necessary sometimes, but obviously, going a little bit away from that procedural, we have to find this document and do this, and leaning more into who these people are, what they care about, and why we should care about them, I think has been incredibly successful, and I've really enjoyed it a great deal. And I think Lonely Hearts Club succeeds at doing all of that very, very, very well. So thank you so much for joining us today, Kristy. Yeah. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. And I had one more, which I was like, I'm going to ask you guys a question. I won't put you on the spot, but I was just saying one of the other small, and I didn't realize it until I was talking to the writer's assistants, because they're like, they do the Twitter, and it's like, give us some fun facts for your episode. And as I was rewatching it recently, I had forgotten about all the movies and TV shows within this TV show that I had to come up with, which was sometimes really fun, but sometimes even just titles we have to clear. But I was very delighted that some of the ones that you made it in, and they're not really, I guess Easter eggs is not the word, but if someone were to go through and track those, they're fun little, you can kind of write a list of all the movies that Neil and stuff was in. But I feel like my favorite was coming up with the sitcom Awful Good Together, which just feels like a very 70s, 80s sitcom. And then we got to name the memoir Awful Good, which I felt was very within Neil's personality. But there's just a lot of fun if you listen to those, Coming Full Circus and Duplicity. You're
yes,
they sound like terrible movies, which is what is funny about them. So hopefully someone on Twitter will make a little running list of that, and I can check it out.
I'm sure. I mean, Matt will definitely have it in his book.
Yes. Matt has already done this. That list exists, and it did. It felt like his movies were. For some reason, it reminded me of Jean-Claude Van Damme's career. I don't know what it was. It's just had that kind of cheese factor.
Yeah. That was me. Just sometimes sitting at my desk, just laughing, just having my own little laugh as if this is so silly, but also so delightful that I get to think of these. But it got very meta there for a while, and I'm like, I
want to see all those.
Right.
But there is a list already in the next edition of my book, so thank you for giving me something to write about.
One of those, I just stole a title, and it doesn't mention a plot, but one of them was an old feature spec I wrote. It was the second feature spec I ever wrote, and I just took the title. I was well, this is clearly never going to ever get made, so I'll just get the title made in a different TV show.
Nice. Which one was that?
Oh, it was when they are walking up to the wedding, and they're talking about Ben's talking about his badge, and he's like, I learned that from Neil's movie Public Safety, and it's the flu weekend. It's literally just the title, Public Safety. I just threw it in there. I was like, I'm going to throw in one mile and see if it clears. It ended up clearing. I was like, really? There's not a movie named Public Safety? It seems like there would be I don't know, a security guard. I don't know. But there sometimes you just throw stuff in there, and you're like, this probably won't make it. And then you're like, oh no, it made it. But so I'll have some fun with my family when they're watching it. I'll get to throw them some this is what this is from. So
cool.
I love that texture. It definitely adds a lot, and it makes that world feel even more real. And to hear some of that resume, I know that Awful Good Together in my mind was very Moonlighting-esque. Like that's kind of where my brain went with it. So
yeah, luckily I never had to come up with what is that show about? Because sometimes, again, like I think I did the duplicity thing. It's like I was like sometimes you just think of that on the spot, but then you're like, oh, but you want to sound like it could actually be a movie. Like it can't be so silly, but it's like, but again, in the world of like 80, like if this would have been 70s, 80s, like times, like it also has to be just like tonally, just like a little absurd that anyone made that movie. Like,
Right.
or they wouldn't make that movie today, obvioally.
I mean, they made Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. So really anything is fair game.
Right, yeah. But you wouldn't make that movie now. So it's like you're thinking of a time, you're in the 2000s, but you're actually writing a fake movie that would have existed in like, 10, 15 years prior to that. So I got very again, I probably spent too much time on it, but those are little things as a writer.
Never.
You get to enjoy, and no one will know the amount of time you spend on it, but and it makes you happy. So
yeah.
Yeah, it makes us happy seeing those kind of little bits that, as Sam says, world builds. So, Kristy, thank you so much for your time. We've had an absolute ball talking to you, and it's been so delightful hearing your recollections about writing an episode that I know both podcasts loved, and I'm sure fandom will take to their hearts as well. Best of luck with the upcoming episodes, and congratulations on joining the Quantum Leap family.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me, and I love doing these kinds of things. I haven't done one of them in a while, but I just love that when there are fans, not only just fans in general of a show I'm on, but the fact that you guys do a podcast weekly to just talk about how much you love the show, I think means a lot to us as writers, because we feel, again, to have people watch it so closely and want to talk about it and engage in work that you've done is extra meaningful on top of the fact that we all love writing the show. And so thank you so much for doing this.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kristy.